find it's always better to fire people on a Friday.
Hi, I would like to relate to you about the experiences at my workplace. My office had a fatal accident during the building process. What happened was that a crane broke and slammed into the side of the building, killing one Indian man and one Thai guy. Since my office operates with shift work, some of my colleagues saw the Indian man, but never the Thai guy. During one night shift, my colleague Daniel was smoking at the corner, away from the security camera, enjoying the view of the Western Sea. From the corner of his eye, he saw a figure. He turned and saw an Indian man looking at him. The man was drenched and looked kind of sad. Daniel was shocked because he knew there weren't any Indian guys working the night shift that day. He was paralyzed with fear, couldn't move, couldn't run, because the figure was standing at the only exit. After a while, the Indian man seemed to be talking to him, but there wasn't any vocal sound at all. After his silent speech, he turned and disappeared. Another colleague, Mark, was having his late supper at 3 a.m. in the pantry. Again, he saw the Indian man standing at a distance, looking sad as though he was trying to communicate with him. After a while, the figure also disappeared. After those incidents became the talk of the town within my office, most people did not want to work night shifts. Hence, the management scrapped night shifts until now. The latest craze in my office involves spirits apparently taking the form of normal humans, appearing to my colleagues as one of their own. Alice went to the ladies' room and saw Brenda combing her hair. They struck up a conversation. Then Brenda went into a cubicle. Alice left the toilet and went back to her workspace. Suddenly, she saw Brenda at her workstation. Alice then asked Brenda how she managed to get back faster, but Brenda replied that she had not left for the toilet the whole morning. Another colleague, Charlie, saw Alice from a distance and tried calling out to her, but Alice walked much faster and turned the corner. Charlie thought Alice had gone back to her workstation. When Charlie reached Alice's workstation, there was no one there. Charlie asked around and was told that Alice didn't come to work that day and had applied for emergency leave. What exactly is happening in this office? The unexplained incidents leave everyone in a frenzy, with a blend of fear and intrigue hanging in the atmosphere. Is it the ghosts of those who perished in the building accident? Or something else entirely?
When I was working in an office a few years ago, I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. Our office was situated in a building that was known for its eerie occurrences. Many colleagues had shared stories of seeing apparitions and hearing strange noises, but I had always been a skeptic. One evening, I was working late as I had a tight deadline to meet. The office was completely empty, and the only light was from my desk lamp. It was around 9 p.m. when I felt a sudden drop in the temperature. I just brushed it off as a draft and I continued working. But suddenly, I heard faint whispers coming from the corridor. I paused and listened carefully, but the whispers stopped. I went back to my work, but the whispers started again. This time, they were louder and more distinct. It felt like a conversation between two people, but I couldn't make out the words. curious and slightly unnerved, I got up and I walked towards the corridor. And the whispers continued, growing louder as I approached. The corridor was dimly lit, and I could see a shadow moving at the end. My heart raced, but I convinced myself that it was just my imagination. As I reached the end of the corridor, the whispers abruptly stopped. I searched the area, but I found no one. Feeling uneasy, I decided to call it a night and then head home. As I gathered my things, I heard a soft humming sound coming from the opposite direction. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound. And to my shock, I saw a woman dressed in an old-fashioned outfit standing near the window. She was humming an unfamiliar tune and seemed oblivious to my presence. I called out to her, but she didn't respond to me. I took a step closer, and she suddenly turned to face me. Her eyes were hollow, and her face was pale and expressionless. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized that I was face to face with a ghost. And before I could react, she vanished into thin air. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, unable to comprehend what had just happened. That night, I left the office in a hurry, and I couldn't sleep for days. The experience made me a believer in the supernatural, and I never stayed late at the office again. What was it that I encountered that night? I may never know, but the memory of those whispers and the ghostly figure still haunts me to this day.
This incident happened when I was on maternity leave. My colleagues related this story to me on the first day I got back to work. Our office building is somewhere in Raffles Place, so I can't mention the specific location. The incident involved a Chinese maintenance worker named Tan, whom we all knew quite well. He was on a night shift that particular day with another Malay colleague. As part of their routine, Tan would go floor by floor to check on broken lights. During his rounds, he noticed a light on the 6th floor that needed repair. It was around 7 p.m. when Tan reached the staircase of the 6th floor. There, he saw a woman squatting with her back facing the wall, making it impossible to see her face. The corridor was dimly lit, and the surrounding silence added an eerie atmosphere. Ignoring any eerie feelings, Tan approached the woman and asked what she was doing there. The woman, without turning, responded in a cold, disembodied voice that sent chills down Tan's spine. She said that her son had been playing hide and seek in the wall and refused to come out. She mentioned, in a monotonous tone, that she had brought him to visit her office. The absurdity of her words baffled Tan, but he brushed it off, thinking she might be delusional or playing a prank. After her explanation, she slowly stood up, but still did not turn to face him. She demanded a cigarette. Her voice, though emotionless, seemed to resonate with an underlying threat. Confused but wanting to help, Tan handed her a cigarette. He fumbled slightly with the lighter, his hands trembling. She then asked him to light it for her. At that moment, the flame flickered to life and touched the cigarette. The woman's countenance shifted dramatically. She began to turn around, each movement slow and deliberate, as if she was savoring the moment. The dim light from the corridor cast unsettling shadows on her form. Tan's heart pounded as his eyes met hers. The face he saw was far from human. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to suck in all the light from around them. Her mouth was unnaturally wide, stretched far beyond what any human mouth should be capable of. It gaped open in a grotesque smile that exposed rows of jagged, blackened teeth. The skin on her face was pallid and appeared to be decaying, as if she had been dead for a long time. As Artan tried to process the terror before him, the woman let out a shrieking laughter that echoed through the empty floor. The sound was a cacophony of madness, filled with malice and despair. It was so piercing and unnatural that it felt like shards of glass being driven into his ears. The haunting laughter reverberated in his mind long after the sound had faded. The shock and horror were too much for Artan to bear. His vision blurred, and his legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed to the floor in a heap, still clutching the lighter. The laughter seemed to linger in the air. When Artan was found later, barely conscious, he was immediately taken to the hospital. The ordeal had left him with a severe fever and a look of pure terror etched permanently on his face. He could barely speak, and when he did, his words were incoherent. Haunted by the memory of the grotesque face he had encountered, Artan never fully recovered from the experience. The terror had taken a toll on his mental health. He resigned from his job soon after, unable to return to the place that held such memories. What exactly did Artan see that night on the 6th floor? No one knows for certain.
This happened during the last 2 years in my previous office building, located in TG Pagar area. It's a pretty new building, about 10 years old, and the last 2 years were my second time working there. My office moved out a month ago, otherwise I wouldn't be telling you this now. Nothing happened during my first stint in the building 10 years ago, but before I started working there the second time, my ex-colleagues who remained in the building told me of some eerie encounters. The funny thing is, these occurrences started after I left my previous company. Some colleagues who worked late would sometimes find the office extremely cold, and usually so since the centralized air conditioning turned off at 6 p.m. And they also claimed that the office photocopier would sometimes print out blank pages on its own, despite no incoming faxes and no one near the printer. Those were their stories. Now, let's start with mine. My job requires me to work irregular hours, so I sometimes come back in the middle of the night. First, let me describe the layout of the office. It is partitioned into 2 areas, mainly the reception area and the rest of the office, separated by an 8-foot-high wall not reaching the ceiling. This means we can still hear anyone talking outside. The main door consists of 2 glass doors using a number lock. Usually, after the receptionist leaves at 6 p.m., there is no one at the front office. The receptionist's counter is covered with a glass piece, and the office is on raised flooring, and it's on the highest level with 3 units. Our unit was in the center, with the other 2 being unoccupied during the last 2 years. Tenants from other units couldn't access our level, as a lift access card was required. Further, the fire access staircase was locked from the outside. Once open and closed, it would auto-lock, trapping you outside. Whenever we worked beyond 7 p.m., we sometimes heard the stationery at the receptionist counter being moved. There were sounds of stapler, clicking of the PC mouse, typing on the keyboard, or even the chair being moved. Although these sounds were a bit scary, they didn't bother us much since it was still early. On one occasion, I returned to the office around midnight to work. The office was pretty cold, even though the centralized air conditioning had been off, as I mentioned, and it wasn't raining. I needed to use the toilet after supper. To get to the toilet, I had to pass by one corridor, and as I passed, I heard someone entering the office by pressing the number lock, followed by a loud bang of the glass door against the magnetic strip. Usually at this hour, only one other colleague or I would return, and we would typically ensure that the door was closed gently to avoid cracking the glass. But I just continued to the toilet to do my business. And while in the cubicle, I suddenly heard the rubbish bin cover spinning loudly. There were only 2 cubicles, and I hadn't heard anyone enter the toilet. I called out, thinking that it may be the security guard patrolling, but no one answered me. And then, the toilet light started flickering. I quickly finished and then I left. When I returned, the office lights were off, even though I had left them on. It wasn't a power trip, as I had to turn the lights back on with the switches, and my PC was still running. Though a little scared, I continued working and I left shortly thereafter. The next day, I asked my colleague if he returned the night before. He said no, as expected, since he's the lazy type who wouldn't return late unless necessary. On another occasion, a lady colleague finished her work around 7 p.m., and after turning off all the lights, she went to the toilet. Passing by the corridor, she again heard someone entering the office with a number lock, and then followed by a loud bang. She turned back to check, hoping to scare the person. But to her horror, no one was there. It was impossible for anyone to disappear within seconds without her hearing the lift door open. She then called me on my mobile, wondering if I had returned, and I said no. She didn't dare to go back and then left. The next day, we asked around and no one admitted to returning. We were all pretty close in our small company, so I doubt anyone lied. The third encounter happened around 10 p.m. when I was the only person left in the office. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Given the uneven raised flooring, it was odd to hear footsteps without anyone around. The fourth encounter happened weeks before our move. I was working late, around 11 p.m., when I saw a transparent figure moving around the office. It looked like an old man with spectacles and a bold top, resembling my ex-boss, who is definitely still alive. Though I was scared, I shouted at him to not disturb me, and then he vanished. On the night before our official move, I was again alone, packing up my stuff, and after packing, I went to the toilet to wash up and then came back to take the lift. As I faced my office main door, the same blurred, transparent old man stood there, waving goodbye with a disappointed look. It was as if he knew that this was my last night there. I waved back, and fortunately, the lift arrived quickly, and I left. So, those are my experiences, till my next encounter, and farewell.
Last year, I was working at a private firm in the eastern area of Singapore as a secretary. It was a demanding job, but I had always been dedicated and aimed to complete my tasks meticulously. The office had a certain charm, with its modern design and large glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the bustling city. By day, it was filled with the hum of conversations and ringing phones. But by night, it was transformed into an eerie, silent place. One particular night, I found myself working late. The other staff members had all gone home, their desks now empty and quiet. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a stark glow over the office, creating long shadows on the walls. I had a pile of paperwork that needed to be completed before the next morning, so I remained focused at the front desk. It was around 8 p.m., and the ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, marking every passing second in the stillness of the office. As I immersed myself in the documents, I suddenly felt a chill seeping in from underneath the table. It started as a gentle cold, but it quickly grew more intense. The odd thing was that the office itself was quite warm, almost stifling, but the air conditioning had been turned off for the night, and I was wearing a skirt that evening, and my legs felt the brunt of the cold, making me shiver involuntarily. The sensation was so out of place that it pulled me out of my concentration. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I glanced down to see what could possibly be causing the chill. To my utter shock, I saw a small, bald, naked child, resembling a 5-year-old, grinning up at me from beneath the desk. His eyes were wide and eerie, and his grin sent shivers down my spine. For a moment I was frozen in place, my mind struggling to process the surreal and terrifying image before me. On pure instinct, and perhaps the adrenaline of the moment, I did something I would have never imagined doing. I kicked the strange kid. My foot made contact, but the texture felt all wrong, almost like kicking through a dense fog or mist. The next thing I knew, I was bolting out of the office, still in my high heels, my heart pounding in my chest. I left the lights on, the door unlocked, and all my belongings behind in my frantic escape. As I stumbled into the hallway, I nearly collided with a security guard making his rounds. I must have looked a sight, breathless, pale, and shaking. Between gasps, I managed to explain what I had seen, though my words were jumbled and frantic. The guard, trying to calm me, assured me that he would check the office. He led me back to the front of the office, his baton ready in hand, while I stood nervously at the entrance, dialing my boyfriend's number with trembling fingers. The security guard entered the office cautiously, searching every nook and cranny, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. I waited anxiously, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the rings as I prayed for someone to answer. Minutes felt like hours, and my mind raced with 1,000 questions and fears. What if the child, or whatever it was, showed up again? What if it was some kind of spirit or ghost? The very thought made my skin crawl. Finally, the guard re-emerged, shaking his head. He found nothing. No sign of the child. No indication that anyone or anything had been there. He tried to reassure me, suggesting that maybe I was just tired and my mind had played tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen, and there was no mistaking the unnatural chill or the malevolent grin of that child. The experience had shaken me to the core. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind replayed the incident over and over. Sleep eluded me. Each creak of my apartment added to my anxiety. I couldn't fathom returning to that office, not after what I had witnessed. The next day, with my decision made, I handed in my resignation without notice. My boss was baffled, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the real reason. What was it I saw that night? Was it really a 5-year-old kid?
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added in the new year. Also, I will be adding new designs to the merch store, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.